So before we get into the topic of energy program evaluation, I want to start out by defining what I mean by a community energy initiative. And the key to the definition really is the term locally based. Community energy initiatives involve establishing an energy sustainability vision at the local level and then setting goals and developing programs to meet those goals. Community energy initiatives can be administered by local government or by utilities, community groups, or educational institutions. And this slide just shows a few different examples of types of initiatives that are out there across the country. So you can see it covers everything potentially ranging from programs that promote energy efficiency retrofits for homes and businesses to community-owned renewable energy installations, to energy-related codes or ordinances that are adopted at the local level, to energy efficiency marketing and outreach and educational programs at the community level. So this webinar is starting to answer the question of, given this broad array of types of initiatives that could be going on in your community, how do you determine whether those initiatives are effective in accomplishing the goals you've set out to achieve? As Andrea mentioned, this webinar is part of the Energy Center's new Community Energy Leadership Series. At the Energy Center, we like to think about community energy planning as a 6-step process. And today, we're actually talking about the last step, measuring success. Now, our upcoming webinar on community energy assessments at the end of June, that's actually going to cover steps 1 through 3. And then our July webinar on program design is going to cover steps 4 and 5. So why are we going out of order? It seems a little odd to be starting at the end, perhaps to some of you. But one of the key points I want to drive home today is that it's important to start thinking about evaluation from the beginning of the planning process. Evaluation is going to be a lot more challenging, time-consuming, and potentially expensive if you decide several years into it that you want to somehow evaluate your progress, but haven't been collecting the necessary data as you've gone along. So the main things I'm going to cover today, first of all, what are the benefits of doing a systematic approach to energy program evaluation at the community level? I'm going to talk about some key concepts and terminology and research methodology from the field of energy program evaluation. And then I'm going to touch on best practices for conducting evaluation research. So the research approaches I'm talking about today really come from the realm of utility program evaluation, where evaluation methodologies have grown out of the need for utilities to demonstrate to their regulators the wise use of ratepayer dollars. And so while some of the approaches I'm talking about may be less for the type of evaluation that you're doing at the community level, you certainly don't have to reinvent the wheel and can take advantage of some of the very solid approaches that have been tried and tested in the utility realm. And it looks like we now have our results for who is on our webinar today. So it looks like about 37% of our audience comes from the field of energy efficiency or environment, which is good. That's a big part of what we're talking about today. We also have about 14% of you from federal or state government, about 12% from municipal government. And we have some utility folks in the room as well. Excellent. So like I thought, a diverse audience, which is always good to see. So the foundation of a community energy initiative is the goals to achieve. And I'll talk a little bit more about goals in a minute. But evaluation fundamentally then is about measuring your progress towards those goals. And there's other compelling reasons that it's important to evaluate what you're doing. Of course, demonstrating that you are using taxpayer dollars wisely. Really finding out how your program is working in the community and developing some compelling stories about the results that you're achieving, as well as the numbers behind those stories. And that can be powerful information to have when you're talking to decision makers or other stakeholders and the broader community at large about what you're doing. Of course, when you're in the planning process, you're making certain assumptions about what your programs are going to achieve and along what kind of time frame. And so evaluation can help you test those about where you were right and maybe where you need to revise your assumptions going forward to increase the accuracy of your forecasting. And then lastly, program design is an iterative process. So you want to find out what's working and what's not working, your program strategy accordingly. So one of my colleagues who's been doing evaluation research here for over a decade likes to say that evaluation is as much an art as a science. So there's no single way or right way to evaluate energy programs. Certain principles that can help to ensure an effective evaluation. Starting with accountability, I think doing some form of evaluation helps to really support that goal of accountability, and also, ensuring that those findings are reviewed by a governing body or some other decision makers that are important. Independence, of course, evaluation is typically done by objective third party, not directly involved in the program design or implementation. But there is an interesting strike here between having that distance and objectivity, but also having good communications and a solid working relationship between the evaluators and the program implementers to make sure there's good information exchange and that the evaluation results are credible. Efficiency, of course, is about how you spend your resources that you have, and you're going to have limited resources to devote to evaluation, and so really focusing on those areas that are most important to measure. Accuracy is really just about using a solid research methodology and good assumptions and the best data that you and effectiveness is making sure that your evaluation results don't just sit on a shelf gathering dust, but that there's actually some process of taking them into account and making the necessary adjustments to make your programs more effective. So as I mentioned, the goals really drive your evaluation approach. And different communities are going to set different types of goals depending on what their priorities and vision is for that energy initiative. If you have local economic development or job creation goals, but all you're doing is collecting information on kilowatt hours saved, the measurement that you're doing is not really going to serve the measurement that you actually want to do about whether you're achieving those economic. So the goals drive the evaluation approach, and that's one of the key points I wanted to stress today. So once you have your goals, you're going to define performance metrics that help you determine your progress towards meeting those goals. And there's a wide range of look at, and so I'm just going to run through a few examples, and I'm sure that many of you can think of others. One of the common things that are looked at in energy programs is cost effectiveness. And these are just some examples of cost effectiveness metrics that you might be looking at. You could also have some participation and awareness performance metrics that you're interested in, particularly if you have a program that's targeting a certain part of the market, like low-income households or small businesses. you may be interested in what percentage of the people in those markets are actually participating and being reached by your program. And then you might also consider developing some performance metrics to make sure your program is being administered in an efficient and streamlined way. So the performance metrics that you're interested in are going to drive the data that you need to collect. And again, this is another reason why it's important to start thinking about evaluation from the beginning so that you're collecting the right kind of data that you. So if you are interested in the cost effectiveness of your program, and by that I mean making sure that the total benefits produced by the program are greater than the total costs of implementing the program, then you might want to think about, of course, marketing, administration, incentives, and those types of things. You're also going to want to have a process for collecting information from the people who are participating in your program. And that's typically done through an incentive application, where you're getting information like the type of building or home where the energy improvements were made, information about what type of measures or improvements were made to the home to make home or business to make it more efficient, information about what your participants, and perhaps some information about where they purchase those products to make their homes or businesses more efficient. Now, when we talk about doing an evaluation of an energy program, types of evaluation that are most commonly done. First off is an impact evaluation, where you're developing a quantitative measurement of the benefits produced by the program. And again, those how you define the benefits are going to depend on what your goals are and what you're trying. Energy savings or emissions reductions or dollars spent in the local market on energy efficient products. Process evaluation actually looks at how the program is working. So from a program design, publishing what you thought it would in the marketplace, and you could also look at administrative factors like how well the program is being run. So the type of evaluation that you do, whether it be impact evaluation or process evaluation or a little bit of both, is and what you're setting out to achieve. If you have a quantitative objective like an energy savings target, you're probably going to want to do an impact evaluation. But the process evaluation can also tell you a lot about how the program is actually working and provide valuable information. So in the next few slides, I'm going to go through the main approaches that are used to measure the energy savings impacts of programs. And they more or less go from the more complex or sophisticated and potentially more costly evaluation strategies. So using deemed savings values is probably the most simple, straightforward approach, and it's pretty of a standard value for each type of energy efficient product that you're promoting through the program in terms of how much energy is saved by that product. And so you're multiplying the savings per unit times the number of units installed through the program to get. Now, it's reasonable to use deemed savings value for a wide array of common energy efficient technologies where the savings aren't going to vary greatly depending on where that particular widget or unit is installed. So, for example, a CFL bulb around the same amount of energy no matter what home it's installed in. So it's appropriate to use a deemed savings value to get an estimate of your total savings. Now, we have a PV system here, kind of as an interesting contrast. You could probably come up with a reasonable average num produced. However, it is a little bit more complicated when you think about things like roof orientation and shading and maybe even the kind of where that unit is installed, you know, be it Florida or Wisconsin. So want more sophisticated approach than just looking at the deemed savings value. Now the key is finding a reliable source of information for those deemed savings values. And a lot of states have either developed databases that you can use or are in the process of. So California, Wisconsin, New York, Massachusetts are just a few of the states that do have existing databases that you could take advantage of. Now, custom calculation or engineering savings calc to deem savings, but it's taking a few other variables into account. So if you think about like a furnace replacement, you're comparing the combustion efficiency of a standard efficiency furnace versus a high efficiency furnace. And then you're also maybe taking the equipment is or what type of building it's installed in. But again, like deemed savings, it's a pretty straightforward mathematical calculation that you're using. Now, it's not possible or appropriate to use a deemed saving of energy saving measure out there. And so that's when we get to the more sophisticated approaches that you can also use. Measurement and verification involves actually measure energy use before the energy efficient product is installed and then after. And then you're doing this in a representative sample of projects. Because it's expensive to do field data gathering, you're not going out to every single representative sample. And then you're using statistics to extrapolate that information to the larger population and get an overall estimate of savings. Now, you may want to think about doing an M&V approach where you're using, we don't have these standard values developed, or also if the savings are going to vary widely depending on where that particular improvement is made. So if you think about like an industrial process improvement, the actual savings you get from that improvement are going to, you know, the unique characteristics of that facility. So again, M&V might be a good approach to think about in those types of instances. And there are established industry protocols for doing M&V. So the recommendation there is to, with those protocols, to do this type of research for you. And then the last approach for measuring energy savings impacts that I'm going to talk about is billing data analysis, where you're collecting energy consumption data from comparison between two groups. You could either be comparing participants in your program with non-participants, or you could be comparing people before they participated in the program afterwards and getting a picture there of how energy consumption has changed. Data is confidential data, so it involves getting customer releases signed that give you permission to look at their utility billing data and working with the utility to get that information. So those are the four main approaches I wanted to. Savings approaches are simple and straightforward and perfectly appropriate to use for a wide variety of energy efficiency measures. However, when it comes to kind of more sophisticated types of programs or maybe whole building approaches where you're doing business, you may need to use something like M&V or a billing data analysis to get a good, accurate picture of what the energy savings impact is. energy impact of a program, an important distinction to be aware of is whether you're talking about gross energy savings or net energy savings. So gross energy savings tally up all of the savings achieved by individual, factor in the degree of influence that the program had in promoting those efficiency improvements. Now, net savings estimates do take into account that program attribution factor, what kinds of improvements are responsible for causing. And a net savings estimate seeks to take two key factors into account in determining that estimate. First of all, excluding any impacts or energy saved that would have happened anyway, including additional impacts or market effects that the program caused but aren't directly reflected in the program participation numbers. Sometimes these are referred to as spillover effects or market effects. Definition, I'm going to go through a super simple example so we can make sure we're all on the same page about the difference between net and gross. So let's take our most basic energy efficiency program, a rebate program for compact fluorescent light bulbs that you might meet in this program. First of all, you have Pete participant. He goes to his local Ace Hardware to buy a new garden hose, and he happens to walk by an attractive display about the energy savings impact, $2 rebate, which cuts the price of those bulbs in half. And so he thinks that's pretty interesting, and he buys a few bulbs. So he's a legitimate participant in that program. He was motivated by the program to take that energy-saving action. Frank Freerider has been saving energy since the 1970s. He has compact fluorescent bulbs in every single room in his house. And one of them burned out the other day, so he decides to go to that same Ace Hardware store and buy a replacement bulb. Anyway, even if there hadn't been a rebate, but he was happy to take advantage of the rebate. And then you have Sarah Spillover. Again, she's going to the hardware store to get a replacement to walk by the CFL display and is motivated to try them out. However, she gets to the counter and the clerk says, hey, you know, there's a $2 rebate, but you just got to fill out this little form. But Sarah's already late, and so she decides to dash out of the store without motivated by the program to take an energy-saving action, but she's not counted in the participation numbers. So a gross energy savings estimate would tally up all of the actions taken by Pete participant and Frank Freerider, and then a net energy savings estimate would try to count the Pete participants and leave out the Frank Freeriders and also somehow account for the Sarah spillovers. So maybe in this example it sounds straightforward enough, but it turns out to be, so among other things, it can be difficult to separate out the influence that a program had from all of the other factors that might have induced a person to make a certain energy-saving decision. You can also see, so for example, if you're using a survey to try and query people after they took an action why they did it, you can have factors like socially desirable response bias, where the person being surveyed wants to look like they were the impact that the program had, or maybe you're asking them so long after the fact that they don't really remember why they did the thing anyway. So measuring free ridership can be tricky analytically, and then measuring spillover presents a whole nother range of analytics that don't even seek to measure it. So why would you care about net savings if it's so tricky to measure? And it's really about ensuring the efficient use of your program dollars, right? So you don't want to be paying, and you want to be maximizing these spillover effects, additional energy savings that occur, and to make sure that you're making the best use of your program dollar. So suffice it to say, there's a lively debate between right now on the relative emphasis to put on gross savings versus net, and if we're going to measure net, what's the best way to do it? So at one end of the spectrum, you have people who say, you know, energy saved is energy saved, so let's just worry about gross savings. What caused the energy savings to occur? And on the other hand, you have the efficiency kind of advocates who are saying, well, we really need to try and make sure we're using our program dollars to maximize the effect that they're achieving. So then it's important to take a look. This brings us to our next poll. I'm curious to get the opinions in our audience today about the relative emphasis to put on net versus gross, or maybe equal emphasis on both. So why don't you click that pie chart icon, and it's been talking about program impact evaluation, and now we're going to switch gears and talk about process evaluation, which again is how you look at how the program is working in the marketplace as well as internally. And I'm going to again cover generally moving from simpler to more complex. So the first thing you can do is kind of conduct a systematic review of your internal processes. So is the information in our tracking database kept up to date and complete? Are the people participating in our program providing the documentation that they're supposed to provide? And how are the overall kind of administrators some bottlenecks that you might want to think about changing? So I think having regularly scheduled meetings internally to talk about what's working and what's not working in the program are pretty much standard operating procedure. Metrics periodically can also be a useful process to go through. Another relatively low-cost approach is to convene a focus group. And the focusing, or the people that you want to participate, would just be driven by the objectives of what you're trying to measure. So you could use it as an opportunity to test out some different marketing materials or messaging to see what's most effective. We've participated in the program with people who haven't, to try and find out what people like about the program and maybe identify some barriers to broader participation. And just generally try and get feedback on how you can make the program more attractive. And lastly, I'll talk about surveys, which can be structured to achieve a broad range of research objectives, either during the market research program planning phase or later on once the program is. During the program design phase, you could do a survey to try and identify community needs or particular concerns of the people you're trying to target in your program. You could test types of equipment people have installed in their homes or businesses. And just, again, get feedback on what types of program support would be most useful. Okay, we now have the results of our net to gross of a pretty large chunk of the audience, about 41%, feeling that equal amounts of effort should be spent on estimating gross energy savings and net energy savings, with 27% thinking more effort should be spent on measuring gross energy savings. So I think this is really interesting. This shows that our audience is quite concerned with that question of efficient allocation of program dollars and making sure it's figuring out the net energy savings is very important from a program design perspective. And so I think those results are quite interesting. Thank you for weighing in. All right. Getting back to survey can help you to, again, determine what's working and what's not working. And as I mentioned before, some of that attribution of energy savings, surveys are a key way of trying to find out improvements that they made. So researchers have a lot of options today when it comes to how you're going to administer a survey, whether you want to do in-person interviews or telephone interviews, mail surveys, and drawbacks. You can get really great nuanced qualitative feedback through either a phone or in-person interview, where questions are more open-ended and it's more of a dialogue by you. And then, email surveys, we now do a lot of our research through web-based surveys, which I think are quite user-friendly and relatively low cost to administer, provided you have a good data. To be aware of potential for bias in terms of, who's more likely to respond to an email survey, you want to make sure that the respondents are representative of the general population that you're interested in. But there are, during an email survey, relatively pain-free to do. Okay, so now I've talked about impact evaluation approaches and process evaluation approaches. Put out a lot of options for your community. And I think there's really 4 things that you're taking into account. First of all, as I've said now a couple times, the goals and what you're actually trying to measure. Second of all, the resources. How much money are you able to spend on, between 3 and 5% of their overall energy efficiency program budget is spent on evaluation, which really isn't much in the broad scheme of things. So you're going to want to focus on those things that are most important. T comes into play, I think, primarily in terms of program design, where, if you're doing a tried and true type of program like a lighting or appliance rebate, where these programs have been done across the country, kind of results you're going to see from those types of programs, versus some more innovative cutting-edge program models like a neighborhood-based retrofit program, or some of the innovative energy efficiency programs. You may want to devote some additional research dollars to thoroughly evaluating the impact that they're having. And lastly, the expertise, and you're going to want different types of expertise for doing a field study where you're doing measurement and verification versus doing a survey work or focus group. evaluation strategy using the fictional town of Cheeseburg, Wisconsin, which is famous for its cheese curds, about commuting distance from Milwaukee, but still retaining that small town feel. And it's struck Cheeseburg more of a tourist destination. Now, the mayor of Cheeseburg has recently launched the Cheeseburg Energy Challenge with the goal of reducing. So how is Cheeseburg going to reach that goal? Well, there's two main components. First of all, since this is the type of thing the mayor can control, reducing energy consumption at schools or the wastewater treatment plant. And then second, really going after that goal of economic development through energy efficiency improvement, helping downtown businesses in Cheeseburg has announced the challenge and put the Economic Development Office in charge of implementing the program. And we're going to walk through a few different elements that are part of Cheeseburg's evaluation plan. It's a community energy assessment to find out where they're starting from. They have a 15% goal. They've got to find out where they are now in terms of figuring out how they're going to meet that goal. And so they're going to be owned buildings and facilities. They're also going to be conducting some energy audits to identify opportunities, both in terms of publicly owned buildings and also the downtown businesses. About the components of a community energy assessment. The next part of Cheeseburg's market research is to engage a broad range of cities with people who work for the city, both people who work in the facilities department to look at their energy usage practices and test their awareness on energy issues. And then they're also going to talk to people in all to add an energy component to the current program offering. So just one example would be if the city has an existing loan program for small businesses, they could investigate adding their efficiency improvements. So it's really important to get a good sense from the start of all of the different things that Cheeseburg is already doing to find out where the opportunities are. Economic development component, and so they want to engage the critical stakeholders that own local businesses. They want to have a focus group that meets periodically over a period of months. So they could be getting their input on what their needs and priorities are, and also getting them to weigh in on different options for things the city could do. Now, since Cheeseburg has a defined energy savings target, they're going to want to do an impact evaluation more or less every year to find out how. So they've compiled this historical energy consumption data during their baseline study, and now they're continuing to keep that information updated on a monthly basis and looking at it every year to see during their assessment that the local wastewater treatment plant was due for some overhauls, and so it seemed like a good opportunity to try and incorporate some state-of-the-art energy-efficient equipment in the plant, and they were doing and post-installation metering to find out how energy consumption changes. And lastly, they have an incentive program for these local businesses where they're reviewing the actual improvements that were made on an annual basis and factoring that in to their impact analysis. And every other year, they're looking systematically at their program processes, stakeholders, program staff, city facility workers, and business owners, same types of audiences that they've reached out to during the planning phase to find out how the program is working for them. So, energy program evaluation can be a complicated, highly technical field, and of course, I think one planning stage as well as when you're actually hitting the ground running and doing your evaluation research. But there are other sources of expertise that you may be able to tap into, like your local